Homesteaders, gardeners, and cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. Today we are making red beans and rice, and we're making this partly in honor of Fat Tuesday, which is coming up, which is a classic New Orleans holiday, and partly because it's just simply delicious, and it's also a very inexpensive dish to make. Today we are going to be making it with red chili beans that I grew in my garden. I grow 100 feet of dried beans every year, and it's a double row, so it's actually 200 feet if you count both rows. And I do a mix of different kinds of beans every year, and I switch it up depending on what I still have in stock and new ones that I'm interested in. I love growing dried beans. I know it's not something that everybody has room to do, but for me, it is such a pleasure, and I get them in the ground. I give them 1 or 2 weedings. I mostly ignore them. And then in the late fall, I pull the vines out and put them in my greenhouse and let them continue to dry in there because I don't have time to pick off all the pods in the middle of fall. And then on rare sunny days in the winter, I go into the greenhouse and pick off the pods that are now completely dry, throw them in a box, and then I just sit on, cold winter nights and shell beans while I'm watching YouTube or something else. I've been doing this for years. These beans originally came from the grocery store, the bulk bin of the grocery store. So for years, I would order special beans from different seed companies, and then you can save them. Beans are self-fertile, and so they're really easy to save from seed and have them come back true. They don't cross easily. But then I realized the beans that I actually cook with and use all the time are red beans, white navy beans, cannellini beans, pinto beans, and black beans. Like, those are the beans that I actually want to cook with all the time. And so while I have some other fun beans that are more heirloom varieties and that I play around with and do different things with, I finally decided, I'm just going to go to the store and buy in bulk the beans that I really want to eat, because they're the beans they typically buy in the grocery store, and I'm going to grow those. And so that's what I did. When you do that, it's a little bit of a toss-up because you don't know whether the beans that you're growing are going to be vining beans or bush beans. Most of them are bush, just because bush beans are much easier to harvest for commercial harvesters, but sometimes they're vining beans. I've grown pinto beans that turned out to be vining beans, and I had to kind of really quickly throw up a trellis because they wanted to go all over the place. And you can totally do that and save all kinds of money. You don't have to spend tons of money on beans from seed companies. You can just grow out what's in the grocery store. So yeah, red beans and rice. We're making it with Tasso ham, which is something that I made over December. I think I was playing around with a bunch of different charcuterie, and I decided to make some of my own Tasso ham. That recipe came from one of the Ball cookbooks. And so I made Tasso ham. I'd seen it in recipes from the South a million times and just never had it. And so I thought it would be really fun to actually use Tasso ham in this recipe, which is traditional, but you can use whatever you have on hand. You can use bacon. This recipe will typically have Tasso ham traditionally, and also andouille sausage. I didn't happen to have any sausage on hand, and so I just threw in a ham hock. So mine is not completely traditional, and that's fine. The beauty of this recipe is it's originally was designed by the women in the South on laundry day, because they needed something that they could just stick on the stove or in the fire and let cook all day and have a meal ready to go while they were spending the day doing laundry. And it's not meant to be super complicated. It's meant to be simple food made with staples that you have around all the time. And then, of course, a little hot sauce on the side is always welcome. So let's get going.
So here I'm weighing out a pound of our homegrown red beans. And anytime you're working with beans, you want to give them a good wash just to get any dirt that might be on them off, and also to check for any stones if they're commercial beans. Sometimes you will find rocks in there that are about the size of the bean that the sifter missed. The nice thing about homegrown beans is any leftover plant matter that might be in the pot floats, and so it's really easy to rinse that off. Any beans that float are typically immature, and I'm sure they're edible, but I just pick them out and they go into my compost, which goes to the chickens, so they get eaten by somebody else instead. And then because we're on very hard well water, we tend to cook with a reverse osmosis filtered water, just so that we're filtering out some of those hard minerals that are in our well. You want to cover these by an inch or two. And I'm really a big fan of the quick soak method rather than soaking beans overnight, partly because I'm never together enough to remember to put them to soak overnight, but also because when you do a quick soak, it greatly reduces the oligosaccharides that are in the beans that cause you to have a lot of gas. And so you bring it to a boil for 1 minute, turn it off, and then let it sit for an hour, and then rinse that water away, and it greatly reduces the amount of gas that beans cause people. I often end up soaking them for longer than an hour just because I forget about it, and you want to rinse them until the water runs clear. So give them a nice good rinse. I didn't get film of me cutting up the onion for this recipe, but you guys have seen me cut up about 100 onions. It's about 1.5 cups of onions. This is 3/4 cup of frozen celery that I happen to have in my freezer. And then we're gonna do 3/4 cup of bell pepper. Traditional would be green bell pepper. Bell pepper, celery, and onion together are called the Holy Trinity in Southern cooking. But I'm using sweet bell pepper instead just because that's what I have frozen. Here's our Tasso ham. Beautiful. And Tasso is actually made from the shoulder of a pig, so this is not belly fat or bacon. I didn't measure this. Recipes that I had varied from anywhere from 4 ounces to 12 ounces, so I just kind of eyeballed this. It's probably about 1/2 cup, maybe 8 ounces total. And we're going to get that on to saute over medium heat to get it to release some of its fat. And then once that happens, we're going to add in our onions, celery, and bell pepper. And we're just going to cook these until everything is happy and translucent, so 5 minutes or so, give or take. And now we add everything else into the pot. So I've got a couple of bay leaves here, various seasonings, including thyme, which is very traditional. And then into the pot go our lovely beans. And then I added in about 7 cups of water, basically a kettle full of water. I like to add boiling water to something like this just because it's so much faster than sitting there waiting for it to come up to boil. Give everything a nice good stir. Put the lid on, bring it to a boil. And then because I did not have any sausage, I'm using a ham hock here. And that's a ham hock I smoked myself, so it's gonna add a nice smoky flavor to this. And then I'm just gonna put this on the back burner of my stove with the lid on and let it cook for an hour or so. In the meantime, I'm making some rice. I am terrible at making rice on a stovetop, and so this little, $30 or less rice cooker that I've had for 15 years is definitely my go-to for making rice. Traditionally, you want to add a little bit of butter and a little bit of salt for this kind of rice rather than just leaving it plain, but you could certainly leave it plain. So it's been about an hour, so I'm going to fish out these ham hocks that should be fully cooked. And then I'm going to taste this for seasoning. Different recipes vary a lot in terms of how much salt And I am really a big believer that beans especially need a reasonable amount of salt. If they're undersalted, they just don't taste good. But I wasn't sure with the tasso and the ham hock how salty this was going to be. I did decide it needed an additional amount of salt, and the recipe in the description includes more salt than I originally started with. These ham hocks have cooled off, and so I'm going to pick off the fat and the bones, which will be a nice treat for the dogs. Don't come at me, they're farm dogs, they're fine. Break that up into nice small pieces. And then that goes back into the pot. And the beans were tender at this point, but I wanted them to be more falling apart, and so I decided to cook it for another half an hour or so. And again, I'm tasting for seasoning. I decided it needed a little bit of brightening and a little bit more heat, so I'm adding in some homemade hot sauce. This is a half an hour later, and we're ready to eat. Fishing out the bay leaves, because otherwise both of those would end up in my husband's cup, I can guarantee you. He's got some kind of weird karma when it comes to whole spices where they always end up in his plate or dish. You guys, this is so good. It's so simple, stick to your ribs, just absolutely delicious. Getting our rice broken up and into the bowl. And then hot sauce, of course. I have a hot sauce video. I'll put a link to it up in the corner. I've been making homemade fermented hot sauce for a very long time. And there you have it. Red beans and rice, absolutely delicious. Give it a try. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and subscribe. We have new content coming out every week.